First up, if the polls are to be believed, the provincial NDP will form the next government of British Columbia. But with the Liberals fighting for their political lives, get ready for a wild and woolly campaign. NDP leader Adrian Dix is already laying down some significant markers like an absolute no to the Northern Gateway pipeline from Alberta to the BC coast. Earlier today, I spoke with the man who would be premier. Adrian Dix, good to have you here. Thanks very much for taking the time.
It's great. It's always beautiful in Vancouver, especially in December.
I can see that.
It's glorious here. This is the best time of year to be here. It's fantastic in December.
Listen, I want to ask you the big national question about your position politically. When it comes to the Northern Gateway pipeline, you have said no. Under no circumstances is the Northern Gateway pipeline going to happen under your administration, should that happen. Does that apply to any oil pipeline from Alberta to the coast of British Columbia? Is that a blanket no for everything?
Well, in this case, there's an application. It's been before us for 2.5 years. We don't think it's in the economic or environmental interests of British Columbia. The current provincial government has handed over jurisdiction to the federal government. For all the posturing on it, they signed an agreement with the federal government that said the federal approval means a provincial approval. It's called an equivalency agreement. And so if we came to office, we would be opting out of that equivalency agreement within 7 days of being sworn into office. And we would be holding our own review here. Well, it would say that we're not accepting the federal process as the provincial process. There's important issues of provincial jurisdiction here. And we don't agree with the current government's position, which was A, that they would hand over jurisdiction, and B, they missed the deadline. Can you believe it? On this project, with this importance in British Columbia, the Liberal government missed the deadline to provide evidence to the process. So we have a different view. We've stated that view in detail to the Joint Review Panel, and we've said clearly what we're going to do.
But in a broader sense, would you say no to any oil pipeline coming from Alberta?
Well, there is oil coming from Alberta now. It's coming actually right out there.
Right. Kinder Morgan.
The Kinder Morgan line, there's a line already. So oil and gas moves around British Columbia, moves around Canada. And in fact, there's a pipeline, Bose pipeline, that's been approved for natural gas going through Kitimat that will support LNG projects. So we're in favor of industrial development generally. We just think that this project isn't a good project for the province. And by the way, people talk about national interest. Well, for decades, it was in the national interest decided by the federal government that there'd be a moratorium on oil tanker traffic on the North Coast. And that was always the national interest. So we're not having a debate between national interest and regional interest. In many respects, we're having a debate about what is the national interest.
You're heading into campaign mode now. You've got an election coming up in May. The one question in every election anywhere in this country that the voters ask are you going to raise my taxes? So let me ask you the question. Are you going to raise taxes in British Columbia if you become the premier?
Well, I've been specific. You know, we're running a different style of campaign here. The Liberal Party's running the same old campaign. They've been running nasty attack ads, mostly against me personally. And we're running a different style campaign. So I've said for more than a year specifically that we would, because we think it's important that young people get access to post-secondary education, that we would reinstate non-refundable student grants, and we'd pay for it by reinstating a minimum tax on the banks that had been in place up to 2008. We also said that on the specific issue of corporate taxes, big business taxes, that we would roll those back to 2008 levels so that we'd have some money to spend on infrastructure and meeting environmental and addressing issues of inequality. So we've been quite specific on those questions, and I think what's happened in BC is by being specific, by being respectful, by saying how we're going to pay for things, as well as what we're going to do, I think people are appreciating that view.
Okay, if you're not going to raise personal taxes, if you're not going to raise the sales tax, if you're marginally going to increase the corporate tax, you've got a deficit in this province of about $1.5 billion, I think is the latest calculation. You've got an extreme problem with infrastructure, as every province does. You've got a lot of spending to do. Where are you going to get the dough if you're not going to raise taxes?
Well, I think there's two ways to do it. One, we obviously need to ensure that there's economic growth in BC, and that's clearly what we need to do. One of the important things, one of the reasons you invest in skills training, is that we have to take advantage. We have to have British Columbians able to work in the projects that are developing in our province. And then modestly, we have to address these revenue questions, and we've been specific about that, to address real needs. So we're setting priorities, right? And for us, those priorities include skills training, ensuring that we invest in the land base, which has been the source of wealth for a long time and has been neglected over time, and address issues of inequality and child poverty. These are our priorities. That means you can't do everything, and we've clear that we can't do everything in a first term of a mandate, but that we're going to focus on a few priorities.
Including balancing the budget.
Well, I don't know. I think that if you look, that's certainly our plan and our goal is to do that. We've had, as you know, since the Liberals were re-elected, and at that time they misled people about the size of the deficit. They said in the election campaign, in the middle of the fiscal year, the deficit was $495 million, and it was, about 5 times that, as it turns out. And then they've run consecutive deficit budgets, even though they have what they say is balanced budget legislation. So we've had 4 consecutive deficits, and we have to move towards a balanced budget. That's the sustainable approach, and we do that. But what we need is economic growth to do that.
Okay, let's talk politics for a second.
Sure.
You're obviously hoping to be an NDP premier. You've got an NDP opposition in Ottawa. You've had a very close by-election race recently where the NDP hung on, but the Greens put on a real run for the money.
Sure.
How would you, as an NDP premier, try and intersect with the NDP opposition in Ottawa? Would it be part of your job to try and lift up Tom Mulcair and the NDP and to make them a viable option for government?
Oh, I think they are, and I think the next election, I think increasingly British Columbians are seeing their role in national politics much more favorably. We used to always vote for the losing side. Now we got more seats. So absolutely, I think I'm very supportive of Tom. Many of the things you'd want to do would require a national government that has similar values and similar commitments. So I would definitely see that happening. Now, it's always been a challenge in the past. When the NDP is in office, traditionally we haven't done as well federally. So what we'll be focused on, absolutely, is ensuring that he gets a fair chance to provide an alternative to Stephen Harper.
But how do you do that specifically as Premier? What sort of things do you do as a government to lift up Tom Mulcair?
Well, by doing a good job, by following through on our election commitments, by doing what I'm doing, which is not promising too much and delivering. Under-promising and over-delivering. That's what we have to do. And if we do that, if we do our job, then the national debate won't be about the provincial government. It'll be about Mr. Mulcair and Mr. Harper. And I like our chances in that race.
Adrian Dix, very good talking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Anytime. Welcome back to Vancouver anytime.
I love it. I come for the sunshine.
Absolutely. You got it.
Thanks again.
Thank you.